So today I wanted to make a video covering the Star Wars Jedi series, as it's always been a series of games that has interested me. I bought Jedi Fallen Order not long after it released back in 2019, and as a massive Star Wars fan who grew up watching the films and even today enjoying all the little series as they make, I was super looking forward to this game. And yet, after a couple of hours of playing this game back in 2019, it just didn't grab me. For whatever reason, just didn't click at the time. But recently, I decided to go back, power through it properly, and honestly, I'm pretty happy I did, because Fallen Order is a very, very good game, and it's one that's aged beautifully. So let's start with the story, because that's where the game really shines. Fallen Order is set around 5 years after Order 66, during the early rise of the Empire. You play as Cal Kestis, a young Jedi Padawan, in hiding after surviving the Purge. And straight away, the game nails that tone. The opening sequence, working as a scrapper on Bracca, hiding your identity, feels grounded and tense. Then everything escalates quickly and you're thrown back into the wider Star Wars galaxy. What I love most is how much the game respects the Clone Wars era. Being a massive fan of that period in Star Wars, it's really done it justice in this game. There are constant flashbacks to Cal's training during this era, references to the Clone Wars, Republic gunships still being used that you can see in game, hints at transitions from Republic to Empire, and just plenty of nods to the Clone Wars itself. Even the opening mission on Bacca, you're stripping Old Republic starships. So yeah, if you're a fan of the Clone Wars era or series, this game has plenty of representation of that era. You'll eventually end up trying to chase down a holocron that has the location of Force-sensitive children on. You're accompanied by a trusty crew of Sia, a former Jedi, Grease, a fantastic pilot, and finally BD-1, your adorable droid companion who helps you navigate the worlds. Along with this main quest, Cal is forced to reconnect with the Force and increase his powers, confront trauma left from Order 66, learn what it truly means to be a Jedi, and facing powerful enemies including the Second Sister. So as for Cal Kestis himself as a main character, I'll be honest, I'm still not 100% sold on him after playing both games. He's not bad, he's just fine, but he just doesn't have the charisma of some other Star Wars protagonists, and sometimes he just feels, I don't know, a little flat, almost like he has a lack of personality at times. That being said, by the end of the second game, I did care about him a bit more than I expected. Although I do wish the game allowed for a few more choices, like imagine being able to lean into the dark side and take that on a lot more. That would have added some serious replayability, especially in this first game. Now looking at the gameplay, this is where things start to get interesting, as a friend of mine actually recommended this as a gateway into Souls-like games. And honestly, that's pretty a good description of it. You've got meditation points instead of bonfires, enemies respawn when you rest, stamina-based combat, dodge, parry, punish mechanics, it's all there, all kind of Elden Ring-like. It's not as brutal as that, but it's definitely not as button mashing as Assassin's Creed either. It's like a nice medium in between both, and yeah, it really is a nice welcomed gateway into Souls-like games. And ultimately, combat feels pretty weighty. Parrying Stormtrooper blaster bolts, I mean, that never gets old. Although there are some issues. For example, the dodge can feel a little underwhelming. Sometimes it just doesn't feel responsive enough. You can get backed into corners and feel trapped because the dodge doesn't quite create enough space for you. I also found issues after a button mashing sequence with a boss fight where it would unlock me from them, meaning I have to relock back onto the character, and in some cases I was just facing the wrong way and just get hit in the back, losing a ton of health. And weirdly, I also found it that wildlife enemies just felt harder than stormtroopers are at the time. Yeah, there are different classes of stormtroopers that offer different abilities and can be more challenging, but wildlife in general, most of the time when you come across it, can offer quite a difficult fight compared to them. But ultimately, the combat is very good. It's not too hard like Elden Ring, but not as easy as the early Assassin's Creed games like I mentioned. There's a nice amount of upgrades for your character as well, whether that's your Force path or changing BD-1 or the Mantis's appearance. Also, not sure what it is with Star Wars games that follow like unknown people's paths, such as Cal, but when an actual Star Wars person from the films or series gets put into the game, even if it's only for a brief amount of time, it's super cool to see, and they do that here with Lord Vader right at the end. Now taking a look at the exploration and planet design, well, the planets are all very well designed. Each one feels distinct. You've got things such as Zephyr's ancient ruins, Kashyyyk's vertical jungle environments. There's just tons of branching paths, secrets, collectibles, and shortcuts to discover on all these planets. There's also the addition of puzzles you have to solve, which do break up combat nicely. They're nothing too complicated, but they're enough to keep things varied. There is the classic issue of climbing and traversal that can be inconsistent though. There were definitely moments where I jumped towards a ledge or a rope thinking I'd be able to grab it, and I just didn't. Again, very early Assassin's Creed-like in terms of movement, and things like that where you're trying to grab something and missing it. It's something that happened in the early Assassin's Creed games and could get a little frustrating. It's also worth noting that not all the planets are designed perfectly. For example, Dathomir in particular was a little bit underwhelming for me. I was really excited to visit this because of the Clone Wars series, but visually and structurally, it just ended up being my least favourite planet. It was still unique in design and had its own enemies to fight, but the ambience just didn't hit as hard as it should for me. But speaking about looks, well, for a 2019 game, Fallen Order looks absolutely fantastic. Lighting is especially impressive, particularly when you're in dark environments and the only thing lighting the space is your lightsaber. It just looks absolutely incredible. Planet variety is pretty strong, character models are good and environments are detailed. I'd argue it's near peak graphics for its time, and honestly I feel like a lot of modern games don't look significantly better these days. That said, there are a couple of niggly annoyances that I want to mention. The lightsaber clipping through textures is noticeable and in fairness happens in the second game. I know this would be super hard to stop, but given the technology we have now, I feel like they should be able to stop this from happening and give it a bit more of a realistic feel. Performance is mostly solid, but I did occasionally get stutters. Not like I was getting massive frame drops or anything, and I even tried locking it to 60 FPS and it still happened. Bearing in mind 99% of the time I was hitting 140 FPS. The final mission was also pretty strange. At the start, where you have to run away from Vader, it said I was getting 144 FPS, but it felt a lot like 20 at that point. So optimization isn't perfect, but it's largely playable and most of the time it's pretty damn smooth. And with this being a Star Wars game, god damn it has it got some good music on it. At first I did actually think there wasn't enough ambient music when exploring. Sometimes the game's background just fell silent in a few missions. That was only early on though, because most of the time the music is there and it is very good. There's one mission in particular where you have a flashback to Order 66 and trying to escape as a Padawan, and the music in that scene is genuinely brilliant and proper makes you feel like you're in a Star Wars universe game. As for the game length, I completed Fallen Order in around 17 hours on normal difficulty. That included pretty much quite a large amount of exploration of the extra areas, finding quite a few of the crates as well. Not 100% completion, but I don't think I was too far off, to be honest. If you're playing on the hardest difficulty, it could be probably around an extra 10 hours I reckon, and if you're wanting to 100% the game, you're probably looking at a total of around 20 to 25 hours. And honestly, that's really solid length for a game. It doesn't drag, doesn't overstay its welcome, it's almost perfect. I mean, the 17 hours for me was just enough to really enjoy it. And having looking back on the reviews, at launch in 2019, Fallen Order was very well received. On Steam today, it still sits at very positive, and I can absolutely see why. It delivered a strong single-player Star Wars story, solid combat, great visuals, and that alone just made it stand out. So my final thoughts on this first game, well, the flashback missions where you play as a young Cal escaping the drones, the soundtrack and the pacing of that mission was genuinely one of the best moments in the game. I thoroughly enjoyed that. But overall, the story is very strong. It's really engaging, it's not revolutionary, but it ties perfectly into Star Wars lore and it makes you ask questions about could these characters appear in later Star Wars series or films. And then, even the ending of the game, well, that final sequence involving Darth Vader for me was absolutely brilliant. You don't fight him properly, you don't outplay him, you just run. And I tell you, that's exactly how it should be. It makes Vader feel terrifying, powerful and unstoppable, which is something Star Wars games don't always get right. I can confidently say this is a very, very good Star Wars game and probably one of the best ones I've played, if not in a long time, then ever. It's really, really strong story, great atmosphere and planet design, solid combat, memorable finish. It's not the perfect game, things like dodge could be better and traversal can be a bit awkward, and again Cal isn't the best protagonist in the game, but overall It's absolutely a game that any Star Wars fan should pick up, especially for a super cheap price in the sale, which you can do today. And considering it came out in 2019, it's aged pretty damn well, and like I said, it looks like it came out yesterday. So that moves us on to the second game, Jedi Survivor, which came out in 2023. And honestly, that still feels pretty recent despite the fact that that was 3 years ago. You can already pick it up for around £8 in the sale, which is kind of mad considering just how new the game is. This was supposed to be the big evolution of Fallen Order, bigger world, bigger story, more abilities, just more everything, and in a lot of ways it pretty much is. But it's also got some pretty frustrating issues that stop it from being an easy masterpiece. So just like Fallen Order, let's start with the story, because that is ultimately one of the most important bits of this game. Jedi Survivor picks up 5 years after the events of the first game. Cal is older, more experienced, and clearly more worn down by the fight against the Empire. The opening mission on Coruscant sees Cal with a new crew. I mean, this crew doesn't last long though, and soon you'll find yourself tracking down the original older members, with an additional new one called Burr. This eventually leads Cal and his crew to searching for a new place where they and other refugees or force-sensitive people can be safe from the Empire. They learn about an ancient hidden planet called Tanalorr that could be a refuge beyond the reach of the Imperial forces, but getting there won't be easy and requires ancient tools and knowledge tied to the High Republic era. Through this story we see Cal go through conflict, betrayal, loss, and even finding love. Now going back to the opening mission, seeing Coruscant in this era, under full Imperial control, just looked incredible. The neon city skyscrapers, the verticality, the atmosphere, it immediately felt bigger and larger in scale than the first game. Now I'll be honest, about 20 minutes in I was worried I wasn't going to like this story. I mean, it didn't immediately grab me, but over time it grew on me massively. The twists were all pretty solid. I did particularly see one coming, but not in the full depth of it, which made it land even way better than I expected. I also liked how they slightly leaned into the temptation of the dark side towards the end. It's not a full branching path system, which I still think would be amazing for a third game, but the internal conflict of battling with the dark side is a lot more present here. If they ever do decide to do a third game, split endings where you could go full light or dark side would be absolutely unreal. And then there's the moment where you switch perspective and play as Seer fighting Darth Vader. That was just a fantastic addition. They made her feel super powerful, as she should be, and that whole sequence was intense and genuinely cool to experience. I also really enjoyed seeing the battle droids as a faction that you had to fight. Again, anything to do with that Clone Wars era, I am all over it. If anything, I wish we could have gotten some more flashbacks between the first game and this one. There's clearly history there, there's lore scattered everywhere, but you have to dig for it through conversations and exploration. I feel like a true montage flashback would have been a welcomed addition, or even a few more cinematic flashbacks would have been helpful and added more emotional weight. And I saw some comments on Steam saying that the story was pretty short, but I've got to completely disagree with that. I thought it was perfectly lengthed. Overall though, really, really strong story. Now as for the gameplay, well, at its core it's still Fallen Order's formula. But there are some great additions here. First off, I love the fact that they didn't reset Cal's abilities. He hasn't forgotten how to fight or lost any of his powers. That's such a common sequel issue with other games, and they avoided that here, which is really good to see. Instead, you build on what you already had. There are a few new force powers to unlock, new abilities to experiment with, and the addition of the grapple mechanic is a really nice touch for traversal. For me, additions to the movement like the grapple gun and the ability to dash mid-air means movement feels the best it's ever been. There's also even a new perk system, which again adds a nice variety to the game's fighting mechanics. But the biggest addition by far has to be the new stance system, which is just incredible. You now have multiple lightsaber stances, things like crossguard, a single blade, double blade, dual wield, blaster stand. There's a ton to choose from, and it adds a load of combat variety, and each stance has its negative and positive stats along with upgrades that you can put into each stance, making them better. The only downside to this is that you're limited to equipping only 2 of them at a time. I really wish you could switch between all of them more freely mid-combat, or just be able to edit it here and there instead of having to go to a rest station to then be able to change the 2 that you've selected. I also wasn't a massive fan on the ally help that you occasionally got in missions. Although it was nice to try adding a new mechanic to this game, for me it just became a bit of a distraction. Also, like the customization options, now there's loads more you can do, which is cool, such as the lightsaber has more options in terms of appearance, as is the same for BD1, and you can even edit the appearance of the blaster pistol. However, they have removed the ability to change the appearance of the ship Mantis, which is a little disappointing, but to be honest, it's not really a biggie. There also seems to be a push in this game to make it feel a little bit more open worldy. You've now got things like shops, side missions, bounties, more NPC interactions, but ultimately it's still structured like the first game, just bigger with a few more distracting things to keep you occupied. One thing I noticed though, this game leans way more into the puzzle side. We did get quite a few in the first game, but here there were quite a few sections where I was working out routes and environmental mechanics rather than fighting. Which, look, this isn't bad, but it does slow the pacing down slightly compared to the first game. I find once they included new mechanics such as the electric bolt that BD can shoot, they then force you to use this for like the first 5 minutes of learning this ability. Again, this is fine, making you comfortable with the mechanic, but it's just something that takes you away from the fighting in this game, which can feel excellent at times, especially with the new takedowns that go along with the fighting, and they not only look but just feel amazing. Also, there's the issue with fast travel, or should I say, lack of it. I get that it's a Soul-like design game, but the maps in this game are way bigger than Fallen Order, and travelling them from one side of the planet to the other can feel slightly tiresome. Yes, there are shortcuts that you can unlock as you go through the levels, but when you finish a main mission and the game doesn't travel you back to the ship, that long run back across the map can get a little bit tedious. A couple of fast travel options just wouldn't have hurt here. Moving on to the bosses, which is not something I actually mentioned from the first game. Here, well, to be honest, I've got a few negatives. You seem to fight the same bosses multiple times. For example, Degangira, you fight him 3 times. And while the fights are solid, they don't evolve massively each time. I feel like these games like this are meant to build up the tension of finally fighting the big baddie boss, but in this game, by the 3rd or even 2nd time you fight them, it just loses its charm and they don't feel special fights anymore. I think they could have built tension without making you repeat the same core fight mechanics over and over. In fairness, look, Fallen Order did this with the Inquisitor, but at least the first 2 times you fought the second sister, it was a relatively short fight, with the 3rd one being the longest one and the one that you need to take more seriously. In this game, it just feels a lot more repetitive. But let's take a look at the graphics and see if they've improved from the first game. Visually, this one looks absolutely fantastic. It's definitely a step up from Fallen Order. There's better textures, there's better lighting, more detailed environments, and most of the planets look absolutely incredible. The larger planets also feel more alive, there's a lot more going on with them. It's not all great graphics wise though, as loading between worlds feels slightly worse than the first game. Fallen Order had that cinematic cockpit hyperspace feel, with you passing through the clouds and transitioning slowly into space a little better, whereas this game is more abrupt. You just get clouds, boom, then space, and then it's just done. It doesn't feel as polished. Overall, graphics definitely are an improvement, but it's just not a generational leap. But with these new fancy graphics does come a big problem. So let's talk about that big problem and the elephant in the room, and that is the optimization. God, it is rough. I have pretty damn good PC and one that can easily run this game on max settings, and look, for the most part it can, and it was running over 140 FPS on max settings for most of the time. But then just randomly it had dropped to something like 90 or 60 or even all the way down to 20, just completely out of nowhere. And this just causes mass stutters in the game, just constantly hitting these walls where you just physically can't move a little bit and then it jutters forwards. And looking back at the Steam reviews, this looks like it's a widespread issue. I even spoke to a friend of mine who has a better PC than me, and he said he had the same issue, that ultimately this game runs like shit. And this to me explains why the game currently sits at mixed reviews on Steam. I completely get that, because when it runs well, this is fantastic. But those frame rate drops can seriously get frustrating. When leaving my review on Steam, I was tempted to leave a negative one just on that issue alone. but I think for the most part, all of the good this game does just outweighs that issue. If it runs better on console, honestly, I'd recommend picking it up there. Now compared to the first game, gameplay length, this one I completed in around 16 hours on normal difficulty, so actually 1 hour quicker. But that included less exploration that I did on the first game, and only a slight amount of side content such as looking for crates. If you're playing this on hard or going for 100%, you're definitely looking at around 25 to 30 plus hours easily, which feels like a good amount of content. It doesn't feel short to me at all, as the 16 hours I played just felt perfect. Now at launch, just like the first game, this reviewed well critically, but play reception, especially on PC, was dragged down heavily by performance issues. Again, like I said, right now on Steam it sits at mixed, and it's almost entirely because of these optimization complaints. If this ever gets patched properly, I think perception of this game improves massively, but with it being 3 years old now, I just think it's going to be left in the state that it's in. So as for my final thoughts on this one, well, Jedi Survivor is, in my opinion, the perfect sequel. The strong story from the first game continued very, very well into this one. There's more combat variety, there's better customization, even better world design, some more cool Clone Wars throwbacks, but the performance issues are just a bit of a serious downer for it. When the game works, it's absolutely fantastic, but when the frames tank randomly, god, it is so frustrating. Personally, I think it's an easy recommendation for any Star Wars fan, even with the issues of performance, and I would absolutely play a third game of this. The only question is, well, where do they go from here? Well, if you liked this video, please drop a like and comment what you thought about these games. Did you have the same performance issues as I did? If you like this style of video, please subscribe for more, and I'll catch you in the next one.
You're quick!